Hi, everyone. Our next segment is going to discuss this issue of corporate treasury or corporate balance sheet impact investing. And if you're wondering what that is, you've come to the right place, because that's exactly what we're going to get into. We're going to talk about what is this? What is the potential? How can it can it be a new avenue for additional capital to be brought to bear on issues of climate and poverty alleviation, etc. And joining me for this discussion is Rosita Najmi, who's the Senior Director and the Head of Social Innovation at PayPal, and who has a long career in working on impact investing, and Amit Bouri, who is the CEO and co-founder of the Global Impact Investing Network. Rosita and Amit, I'm so happy to have both of you joining me for this conversation today.
Great to be here.
Great to be here. Yeah, looking forward to it.
Yeah. So, Rosita, I want to turn to you first, and I want you to tell us a little bit about PayPal's experience, because PayPal is, new to this form of impact investing. So, tell us a little bit about how it came about for PayPal, what you've done in the last year, 18 months, and give us a little sense, an example of what is, corporate treasury impact investing.
Absolutely. And thank you for the opportunity to be a part of today, as well as to have a conversation with Amit. Just for those of you who are not familiar, PayPal is a fintech, and our mission is to democratize financial services so that people and families can improve their financial health. And so small businesses and merchants of all sizes can pursue economic opportunity. We've been at the forefront of the digital payment revolution for about 20 years, and we've leveraged technology to make financial services and commerce more convenient, affordable, and secure. In terms of our experience, our commitments to date in corporate treasury impact investing has totaled around 500 million, and in 1 year, we deployed already 400 million of that. The PayPal journey with corporate treasury impact investing began in June of 2020. It started with a commitment of $535 million to support Black businesses, strengthen minority communities, and fight economic inequality in the United States. This $535 million commitment included a $500 million economic opportunity fund, and $400 million of that was what we're calling balance sheet impact investing. And the investment thesis was enabling financial access and health, as well as opportunities for generational wealth creation. And as we were wrapping up the deployment of this 400 million, we made an additional commitment of 100 million this summer as part of the United Nations Generation Equality Forum, with an investment thesis focused on SDG 5, so Sustainable Development Goal 5, on gender equality for women and girls. As I reflected on the deployment of this initial 400 million, it was not easy to move so much capital so quickly, but we did it in a year to do our part to drive transformative change in the racial divide as quickly as possible. And for those of you who are interested in a little bit of details of the breakdown across allocation and impact, we basically had 3 investment allocation categories: deposits, funds, aggregators. We had a bit over half of our total in deposits, about a little over a third in funds, and the rest in aggregators. With the help of the Bridgespan Group, we developed an impact measurement framework. And the simple version is, one axis, we looked across a spectrum of social impact focused on equity. Is this investment equity serving, equity centered? Is it an equity standout? Across the other axis, we thought about what's PayPal's value proposition beyond our financial capital, and the essence of impact investing, where we're thinking about other types of capital. So we looked across low, moderate, and high, and we thought about what's the role of our reputational capital in crowding in other funders? How can we leverage our intellectual capital and maybe combine our cash with some of our products, so that these financial institutions we were seeking to empower could maybe even enhance their product offerings to their vulnerable populations that they were serving? And finally, looking at human capital, we thought about, how do we leverage the expertise of our employees? In this case, the expertise of our treasury team on the structuring, the terms and conditions, which frankly was unfamiliar to both sides, right? We had sources and uses that were unfamiliar with each other, that were trying to match up these dollars. And so really we were able to kind of leverage beyond our financial capital. And finally, just looking ahead, there's a lot to do. to manage this, the credit and operational risk. We have a lot of work in terms of building our internal capacity, refreshing our policies, and we're really excited about the opportunity of service in terms of field building, crowding in other balance sheets, thinking about how to efficiently build the pipeline, and playing our part and contributing to a global movement that could expand to non-US balance sheets.
Great. Amit, I want to turn to you because I think that what you can sort of bring us is a little bit of a zoomed out picture. So we've heard about the PayPal experience. What are you seeing is happening a little bit more broadly? What do you think the role of corporates is in this space? How are these things changing? Are there other examples of companies who are using their balance sheets to make these types of investments? And obviously with the PayPal example, that 400 million has been focused in the US. So how can this also be brought to bear globally?
Absolutely. And I do think it's important to acknowledge that this is such a dynamic time when we think about the role of corporates and companies in the private sector as it relates to these huge social and environmental issues. We see debates in the news constantly around stakeholder capitalism and rewriting the contract of companies with society. It's a hot topic at COP right now. It's certainly a topic at forums like the World Economic Forum, the United Nations, and beyond. And what I think is so powerful about what's happening right now is that we've seen a long history of corporates trying to do more to help support communities and the environment. This has taken the shape of everything from better employment practices to how they volunteer employee time, donations of product, corporate philanthropy, procurement practices, and beyond. But what I think is really important is to think about the financial assets of the corporation, and how those assets can be activated for positive impact. And that's where I think we have kind of a convergence of the trajectory of corporate social responsibility that goes back several decades, and of impact investing. And it's not brand new, and there have been a number of corporates who have been thinking about how to make impact investments for some time. This has often taken the shape, though, of like how they deploy philanthropic assets or a specialized like impact venture fund. And we've seen great work from companies like Starbucks and Johnson & Johnson, and Patagonia's launched a venture fund and beyond. But what I think is really critical now is actually thinking about like treasury assets, which are not, so they get, tends to grab a lot of headlines, but a lot of corporates do have these pools of capital that they use to manage their business and have reserves for acquisitions and other activities that are important to advancing their strategies. And what I think is so exciting about what Rosita just outlined is how this is actually, I think we're in a moment where a lot of companies, were kind of reactive to either kind of the climate crisis, where we see a few companies actually make allocations of treasury assets for climate solutions, or for broader kind of like social issues like the Black Lives Matter movement that really surged to the forefront in 2020. But that's actually sparked a conversation in the line of inquiry where more corporates are trying to figure out what they can do with these assets. And so I think we're at the beginning of a very fascinating journey around how do we shift the way that we think about treasury assets, and how do we think about activating them for impact?
So a question for both of you then is what is the potential? How much money is out there in corporate treasuries? What proportion of that might corporations be willing to invest or thinking about invest? Why does this conversation we're having here today about this topic matter? I don't know which one of you wants to take that first, but I'll throw that first.
I'm happy to dive in because the development economist is particularly having dances of jubilation right now. So this is a unique moment. I really want to underscore what Amit said in terms of this moment. It's unique in that it's the supply side and the demand side are primed. So on the demand side there could not be a moment where we need this capital even more for being a part of the blended finance solution, right? We're far behind chances of reaching the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030. We've reversed progress in, minimum 5 or 6 years, according to many estimates, because of COVID. And so we need an enormous amount of capital. So the demand side could not be greater. But also on the supply side, we're in an era of abundant capital. Today, financial capital for the private sector is no longer a scarce resource the way it was in the past. It's actually quite abundant, quite cheap. Bain, their macro trends group, they estimate that the global financial capital has more than tripled over the past 3 decades and now stands at roughly 10 times global GDP. So we're talking about trillions of new dollars that previously were not available or even considered for being a part of development finance or being a part of blended finance solutions. So I think the why now is this is an exciting and unique moment where both the demand side and the supply side are primed. And so I think, that's what gives me the most amount of hope in terms of the opportunity of scale, and that there are a lot of companies that have a lot of cash on their balance sheet and clearly have a lot of purposes for those. First and foremost, their sustained growth and, accountability to their shareholders, but it's also a time where they can think about where they put their money, which is, a basic enterprise level decision, can have multiple outcomes and can actually be a part of a company's strategy around how do they achieve their ESG outcomes, right? When you think about, what's in it for a private sector company, there are so many opportunities. First and foremost, being a solution to the crises that we're facing, of reaching the SDGs, responding to the climate crisis. But also, it's a chance for companies to think about how do you integrate your core operations into your ESG outcomes, as opposed to relying on your corporate philanthropy or a team like mine to drive those outcomes. It's also a unique time as it relates to the talent war. We're following through the year of the resignation, and good talent is looking for opportunities to align their talent with mission and vision. And so I think it's another opportunity to think about talent. Similarly, customer activism is on the rise. Customers want to buy goods and services from value-driven companies. It also provides an opportunity of learning for treasuries and, kind of financial and asset management overall, as they're thinking about how to shift their investment policies. And as Amit mentioned, many companies are trying to find opportunities to be values driven and to act on this idea of stakeholder capitalism. So the moment is really prime in so many ways.
Amit, is there anything you want to add to that in terms of what the sort of potential or opportunity is here?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think it's this comes at a time, and certainly all of this has been kind of elevated and exacerbated by COVID, where we are looking at these huge systemic issues that the world is facing, and systemic challenges require systemic responses. So as we're talking about the future of development finance, of course, every donor agency around the world and every development finance institution around the world has some type of mandate or directive to mobilize private capital. And I think it's important that we really think about how do we unlock the various pools of private capital, whether it's huge pension funds or kind of high net worth individuals, which is where a lot of the activity and impact investment has focused historically when it comes to the private capital, but also the role of corporates. And everything that Rosita said, I think, is spot on in terms of the corporate perspective at looking at these issues. We actually have seen a lot of interest, just as we've started to explore this in the past months, a lot of corporates are actually quite interested in exploring how they can do more and are quite curious. I think Rosita really underscored the education need. This is very different. When I say this, impact investing is very different from how most corporates are thinking about managing their financial assets. But there's a great deal of openness to learning and to trying to figure this out. And I think we have a collective opportunity to think about how we can take as much of those corporate treasury assets and activate them for positive impact. And I do think there's a shift too also that's happening in the conversation around ESG and even around climate risk and the climate crisis, where a lot of it initially was around risk management. And increasingly it's shifting towards how do we drive positive impact on these systemic issues? Because every corporate executive that's trying to think about sustainable financial performance is now recognizing that they have to play a role in addressing these systemic issues like the climate crisis or social instability, which we're seeing in the national context, but even internationally when it comes to supply chain vulnerability. That's certainly at the forefront of the corporate dialogue today.
Great. Well, I think you sort of teed up the next question that I have very well, which is talking about what's needed then. So we have this opportunity, but there's maybe a limited number of companies who have done this. Companies are interested in doing this. Rosita, maybe I'll turn to you first. What, you've been sort of doing this and trying to set up the infrastructure. In just, a couple of minutes, what's needed at the corporate level? How can companies go about trying to do this?
I mean, I think my first message is don't feel like you have to do it alone. There are many companies that have already started doing this. There are others who are interested. So my recommendation would be let's do it together and let's figure it out together and kind of build upon the efficiencies that can come with that. Clearly, internally, there's going to be a spectrum. There's going to be some companies that are able to invest in additional headcounts that brings in those specific skills, whether it's on the impact measurement side or on the traditional investing side and the adaptations that would be needed for that. But you can do it in an incremental way where if you don't have a large budget or a large number of headcount to dedicate to it, you can do it incrementally. But I think certainly there needs to be an investment in kind of capacity on the skills side and bandwidth. This is not a side hustle or job. It is a craft and requires certain skills. I think you also have to look at your overall policies. What are your current policies over the management of your cash and just your overall investment strategies, and how might they be adjusted? Do you want to set kind of an internal percentage of your free cash flow or your percentage of your assets under management? So I think a lot of internal conversations need to be had in terms of levels of comfort and levels of investment and how quickly you want to move. And then I think there's opportunity also in terms of doing it alone versus going in with others. A number of the investments we made as part of our 400 million, we didn't do alone. In some cases, we were first, but it was together with other sources of corporate balance sheets.
Great. And Amit, what's needed at sort of the ecosystem level?
Yeah.
So Rosita's talking about not doing it alone. Does there need to be some sort of platforms to help bring together organizations? Are there government policies that maybe need to be tweaked to open up the potential to do more of this, so that, regulations around how much cash on hand companies have to have, et cetera, and how they can spend it?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think, I really appreciate the question, because it is about fostering an ecosystem that allows more capital to flow to high impact projects. And just building on what Rosita said, I think this point about learning is absolutely critical. And part of why we're a network, of course, is to accelerate collective learning. Because when it comes to impact, we cannot afford for capital to underperform. And we also cannot afford to wait. These are very present crises that we're all contending with when it comes to the climate crisis or inequality that have immensely high stakes. So a couple of the specific things that we think are important. First, education at every level. Whether it's the C-suite, CEOs and CFOs, to treasurers, to kind of the operating teams. But we think really helping people understand this at a strategic level all the way down to an operational and tactical level is key. This is, as Rosita mentioned, it is a craft. It is not just like a side hustle, as she said, but it is these are really critical capabilities to build. But the good news is that there's a lot of great people out there and a lot of great partners who are good at this now. And I think part of what we see as a role is helping cross-pollination. Because there's a lot to learn. Corporates can learn a lot from the traditional impact investment community and vice versa. And we already have a number of corporates active in our network, including PayPal, among others. But then I think, to your point, there's a lot of specific policies and regulations to clarify kind of the management of treasury assets and what's permissible, all the way down to specific tools that corporations can use around strategy, portfolio management, and impact measurement and management approaches as well. And so we're quite excited about the opportunity to take this on and really help pave the way for many more companies to activate their financial assets for impact.
Yeah, and I know when we've talked about this, Rosita, especially you've talked about that one of the most exciting pieces of this is that it's actually new capital. That so often we're talking about how do we sort of repurpose or direct capital from one place to another, and that's part of what makes this stand out. We have just a minute remaining, so I'll go to each of you for 30 seconds. But what do you think is sort of needed for the way forward? What types of investments do you think this will be most useful for? And how does that fit into the broader sort of development finance picture?
I'll just make one request, which is data. So in order to unlock the private capital, we have to help it be faster in terms of the due diligence process and the calculation of risk. And one way to do that is, the development financial institutions to really unlock the data that's available to enable and to give confidence in the calculations. Because private sector company, even in global ones, they just don't have that. They don't have the numbers to be able to do these calculations accurately. So it's going to slow things down. It's going to make it really expensive to do this due diligence. So I think it can unlock the dollars both at a speed level as well as a volume level if some of the development finance data is made more publicly available.
Amit, in like 20 seconds.
I'll be even faster. I think a bias towards action. The time is now, and we're looking to collaborate with anyone who's interested in helping to advance this agenda. Thank you.
Great. Well, Amit and Rosita, thank you so much. I hope that we continue to talk about these issues. And certainly for those of you who are interested, we'll have more on all of this at Devex and in the Devex Invested newsletter as things move forward and as we watch this trend unfold. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Take care.